Steelers owner Art Rooney says the Steelers won't close the door on anything, including trading for a quarterback. But what does that mean? We talk about that and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter with Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. The easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports is PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. More on them later. Wes Uhler is back on the show, baby. The man himself from Steeler Nation Radio. It's been a minute since we had this guy. He's got 2 kids at home. He's working Steeler Nation Radio every day. He's doing it with Arthur the body. It's just we're just as he flexes on camera. We're so happy to have him back. Wes, how you been?
What's up, CC? Yes, it has been way too long. It's been so long, in fact, that I've actually had a few listeners over the last couple months that have tweeted me and been like, hey, when are you going to be on Locked On again? It's been too long here. It is. You and I both have crazy schedules. I mean, you work for like 7 different jobs and cover every single team in Pittsburgh. And, I am now traveling with the Steelers as part of my gig and at every game and away a lot on the weekends. And as you mentioned, I've got 2 girls that are 2 years and 8 months old. So, 2 young ones, which obviously is a bit of a time commitment, as people can imagine. So, yeah, it's been hard to find time for us to jive, but I'm glad that we're back in the saddle here. And I'm always excited for this. Listen, I know when I come on Locked On, I better bring it. All right. You've carved out a passionate listener base here that if they don't like what you have to say, they'll let you know in the YouTube comments.
Trust me,
they'll get at you on X, get at you on Twitter. So I've been up early this morning stretching and getting limber and ready to go here because I got to bring my A game. I haven't been on Locked On for a minute. I got to be ready to go.
So, Wes, on that note, let's get into one of the bigger topics that's going on right now, and that's Art Rooney's comments to Bob Pompiani, earlier this week, saying that the Steelers aren't closing the door on anything when asked about trading for a quarterback. And immediately red flags go up everywhere. Oh, this means they're getting Justin Fields. Oh, this means they're getting this. And everyone leans to Justin Fields, even though reports indicate that the Bears probably want a second, maybe even a first-round pick if they're going to trade away Justin Fields. Granted, not sure if they'll get that because everyone knows they kind of want to get a quarterback with the first overall pick, and there's a lot of politics there. But point being, Wes, I'm not 100% sure why people keep leaning into the Justin Fields thing, because even if it's not a first-round pick, even a second-round pick just seems like a lot for a quarterback who has 1 year left on his deal, hasn't really shown – he's shown flashes of athletic potential, but he hasn't shown that he can be part of conducting an offense. I know some people are saying, well, Kenny Pickett hasn't either. Why is any faith being put in him? But I just think the assets it would take to get a Justin Fields are much bigger than people realize on a team that, as exciting as people are about this team moving forward, they have to keep attacking in their personnel to get the right kind of guys. They need a center. I think they need a tackle. We'll get into cornerback talk later in this in this show. Safety, linebacker, defensive line. I even say wide receiver isn't off the board, and quarterback as well. With all those different types of needs, this is not a team I think that can just be aggressive and make some big trade to get the quarterback that isn't proven. It'd be one thing if Justin Fields, had, I'm not going to say Patrick Mahomes numbers, but if he had, maybe CJ Stroud numbers for at least once in his career, and you were like, okay, there's something there. These guys just want to go get Caleb Williams. We'll go get that guy. That would be different. This is spending a lot on an experiment that's going to last you 1 year before you have to pay him, if he even is the guy. Whereas you can use probably the draft capital you're going to spend to get this guy to get rookies that are going to build your rosters you'll have hands on for the next 4, maybe even 5 years.
Yeah, Chris, you can sell me, pretty easily that a a high-end quarterback would make all the world of the difference for the Steelers and that they would suddenly be a team that you could even consider a contender, you could sell me on that all day, and I think you'd probably be correct. I'm just not convinced that Justin Fields is that guy. I think Justin Fields has potential. I think Justin Fields is talented, but there's a lot of question marks there, as you just kind of laid out. He's not a guy who has years of proven production in the NFL. He is not a guy that if you bring him in right now is going to instantly upgrade the position. I understand why it's a thing. He's a fun player to watch. He's exciting. He's got potential. You could see him in the right system with the right pieces and the right coaching, again, becoming and developing into a nice NFL quarterback and having a solid career. I just don't know if the capital, in fact, I do know that the capital that Chicago is going to want for the question marks that still remain around Justin Fields, I just don't think that's the risk to take right now if you're the Steelers. If Chicago's trying to completely wash their hands of this guy and say, hey, fourth round draft pick and you could take him off our hands. Okay,
that's the right price.
That's a completely different conversation, but they're going to want that 20th overall pick, or they're going to want the 51st overall pick and some extra sweeteners, maybe a future, second or third round pick as well too. And I don't think that Justin Fields fits that mold right now for the Steelers, where okay, you bring this guy in and you are instantly a better offense. If we were saying yes to that question, 100%, maybe it is the time to be aggressive, but that's the furthest thing from a sure thing, especially for the capital it would take for you to secure a talent like Justin Fields.
And again, if he was a free agent, I'd be like, oh yeah, go get that guy. Like, that's a whole different ballgame. Sure. We're simply talking about this team has so many needs right now that need to be addressed, not just for the team right now, but to keep building in the pipeline. A big part of what happened to the Steelers in the late 2010s was they became very top heavy. They had some great talent on their roster, but they didn't have great depth behind them. And so when those players got injured, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown had depth behind him, but like when Ryan Shazier went down, when Stephon Tuitt went down, when those guys started getting hurt, the team was toast. They couldn't
when Joe Hayden would get hurt. Yeah.
Right. You were hoping that James Pierre just wouldn't let you get burned. This team needs to develop so many things right now. And that's where I think that the big reason is that you can't go and get a Justin Fields unless the Bears are, if you wait them out and no one else goes and gets Justin Fields and the Bears come off of the second round pick talking, they're like, all right, we'll take a fourth and maybe a fourth and a next year fifth. Then maybe we can talk about it then. But even then, I'm still like looking like, all right, because the Steelers have 2 fourth round picks this year. You might want to use both of them to address, again, depth at corner, depth at safety, depth at line, anywhere at this point in time. So there's a lot of different things that can happen here. But Rooney's comments to me signify, look, we don't know what's going to happen at quarterback. This team's probably going to let Mitch Trubisky go in the offseason, as they should. They're going to keep Kenny Pickett because he's on a rookie deal and you're not paying him that much. But you're signing Mason Rudolph, and even if you are signing Mason Rudolph, you're probably adding another quarterback to this room, which means you're not closing the idea of trading for a quarterback. It just doesn't have to be a Justin Fields.
Correct. And I think that's the one thing that I would take from this and continue to, heck, I guess you could even say be encouraged about if you're a Steeler fan is, listen, the Steelers in a lot of ways move like the Titanic. I mean, they turn like the Titanic, right? It's a very slow process. It's not a quick turn, but that has started to happen over the last few years. Even at the end of the Kevin Colbert tenure and now into Omar Khan, the Steelers have stuck to the traditional Steeler way of operating a little bit less year by year over the last 4 or 5 years quietly, right? It started with going and trading for Minkah Fitzpatrick back in 2019 when you lost Ben Roethlisberger in your second game of the season for the year, and everyone's thinking, what are the Steelers doing? That could end up being a top 5 pick. Yeah. You go and you trade that pick for Minkah. First time you traded your first-round draft pick, the Steelers organization, since the Beatles were still on tour. I mean, that's how long it has been since the Steelers traded their first-round draft pick. They've been more aggressive in free agency. They've been a little more aggressive in the draft and going up into the top 10 to get Devin Bush and going up to get Broderick. The Steelers' way is still a thing, particularly when Mr. Rooney is at the helm and Mike Tomlin has been involved for so long. But the Steeler way has also evolved much more even again at the end of Kevin Colbert's tenure and now into Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. So that's the thing that I would continue to kind of take from this and believe is that I would expect the Steelers to really be considering doing things that they haven't done often in the past because, again, over the last few years, we've seen them be more aggressive. We've seen them be less traditional and less conservative in what we always thought was the Steeler way. So something with a quarterback could be on the board. I'm just with you. I don't think that the Justin Fields scenario is the one that the Steelers are looking at or are seriously considering at this moment.
Absolutely. And again, this isn't against Justin Fields' talent overall. It's just saying, hey, like they got a lot of needs. And if the Bears want some, serious draft capital, that's going to be a tough ask for the Steelers right now. And especially, again, because he has 1 year left on his deal. That's another big factor in this.
Right.
But where could the Steelers use some of that draft capital? Cornerback is a position that I don't think we've talked about enough on this show. We'll talk about that with Wes on the other side of the first break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Wes Uhler, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is sponsored by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Its class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8 people, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure by shopping at nissanusa.com. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Wes Uhler of Steeler Nation Radio. Wes, we have done, we will continue to do a lot of talking about the offensive line and what the Steelers need to do at offensive line, center and offensive tackle, such big pieces of importance. And these are good classes to go and get either position. We've talked about Jackson Powers-Johnson. We've talked about Zach Frazier, who I'm sure you'd be raring to get to. And he's a big West Virginia guy over here. And at some point, I will want to ask you more about Zach Frazier on a day when we're diving deep into the center position. But
sure, if you've got 5 hours, yes, I can talk about Zach Frazier as much as you want. 5 hours, he says. Absolutely. Hey, listen, I know you're the WVU guy. You've got like 3 different WVU podcasts and shows and stuff. Just one now, really. We've consolidated.
Just one. Okay, at least you've gotten it down so that you're not always talking about Mountaineers and how they got their butts handed to them by Pitt basketball at WVU.
Hold on. This is a football. Now this is a football podcast. All right.
Anyways, getting back on topic. In all seriousness, this is a cornerback class that as much as we're talking about the state of the offensive line class, this is a strong cornerback class. There's guys like Cooper DeJean, who, out of Iowa, who everyone's waiting to see how he tests, but at 6'1", 207, can he fly and change direction with the best of them at the combine? Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo, both the Alabama corners, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw Jr. of Missouri, Kamari Lassiter of Georgia, Mike Sanderstil of Michigan. There's so many names that if the Steelers got one of these guys, I think a lot of people would be like, oh yeah, he's a good plug and play, get him in there early and he's going to have an impact, and him and Joey Porter Jr. could be longtime talents. But is that a priority right now with where the Steelers are at? We know Patrick Peterson's on the roster right now. He played a little safety at the end of the year. He wasn't too great at corner. It's just the question is, where is the priority for you, Wes? If you're thinking on the Steelers side of things, should they be getting a corner way up high, maybe even a first-round pick over offensive line, or is it going to be one of those late day 2, maybe day 3 even picks?
Yeah, Chris, and this is going to sound like such a cliched answer. I hate when I have to do this, but I think the Steelers are in a position to really, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, if I'm Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and Mike Tomlin and all the decision makers, this to me is a classic Pittsburgh Steelers BPA best player available draft, because I don't think you have one. Now, we could argue center, I think, is probably the position, or tackle, right? Just offensive line in general,
sure.
as the kind of glaring thing that sticks out that you really need to address. But it is a opportunity for the Steelers where a lot of their needs, we can talk center, we can talk tackle, we could talk another cornerback, we can talk some depth on the D line, we can maybe talk an off-ball linebacker with some of the uncertainty with injuries there as well too. A lot of these positions of need that we're going to talk about incessantly for the next couple months as we lead up to the draft, right? The combine and then the draft. I think the draft classes mesh very well with what the Steelers need. There's a lot of centers in this class that I like in the first round, in the second round, and the third round that I think could have an impact on day one. Same with tackles. There's a lot of off-ball linebackers in this class that I like. Not so much at pick 20, but in the second and the third and the fourth round, who I think could be quick impact guys for the Steelers. And there's a lot of defensive backs, both corners and safeties as well, too, that I think are in that same range. So one of the areas I think the Steelers have gotten themselves in trouble is more lately in the draft than not. I think they've reached for position of need. I think they did that with Devin Bush going up in the top 10 to get him when they desperately needed a linebacker. We could have that conversation with Kenny Pickett if we want to about how the top quarterback in the draft fell right into their lap. And was that an opportunity for them to say, hey, here's the guy, let's go. We don't have to really rebuild or anything like that. We can hit the ground running with a new quarterback, the number one guy on pretty much everybody's big board. They have, maybe guys like Kendrick Green, some guys in the second and third rounds as well, too. It feels like you could even argue this with Najee Harris, who I think we've all thought has turned into a nice player. But do you draft running back in the first round? Did you just do it because you so desperately needed to kickstart the run game at that point late in Ben Roethlisberger's career? All these different things. I think the Steelers less and less the Cam Hayward draft picks of a guy that was the best player available and you didn't expect to go D-line, but you did. The David DeCastro draft pick, where you had just taken an offensive lineman in Marquise Pouncey in the first round and you probably weren't going to do it again, but you couldn't pass up on this guy because you had him so high on your big board and he fell to you. I think there's a real opportunity, particularly at 20 and 51, for the Steelers to do that in the draft. There's going to be a couple centers. There's going to be a couple linebackers. Yeah. There's going to be a couple tackles. There's going to be a couple defensive backs. And we all know there's always a couple wide receivers and playmakers, right? This, to me, is a BPA draft. And so that's a long-winded answer of getting back to your, yes, if I'm there at 20 and there's a corner that I think is a top 10 player, a top 12 player, top 14 player, I'm considering taking him. If I'm there at 51 and there's a corner that we have ranked 27th or 33rd on our big board and he's there at 51, I'm taking him. Absolutely. This, to me, is a BPA draft. You don't have one glaring, okay, if we go out and get this guy, it's going to make all the difference in the world. I think, to me, corner falls into that short list again of tackle, center, off-ball linebacker, maybe defensive line as well, too, where I'd really be looking those first 3 or 4 picks and just going BPA down the board of however the draft falls.
Listen, that is the ultimate Steeler answer is BPA. That's how they want to operate. And frankly, it's not just a Steelers answer. It's how all, I think, GMs want to answer BPA, because also that prevents any team from locking in on what you need. Like, for example, when the Bengals went ahead and took William Jackson III ahead of the Steelers and they had to pick Artie Burns that year, that was when they absolutely needed a corner. What did you say?
I said that's another good example of them reaching for a position of need. Yeah,
exactly. And I think it is also different then, because when you're looking at the 2016 Steelers, or going into the 2016 season, the Steelers at that point in time, they had Ryan Shazier, they had Bud Dupree, they had Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown. They were figuring things out. They were maybe a corner away from being a Super Bowl champion, which is why they went and got Artie Burns. Heck, they made it to the AFC Championship that season with Artie Burns. But that is when sometimes those big swings can come back to bite you. And now you're at a stage where you're building to get back to that point, which is why I agree with you. Best player available has to be the route that they take. It can't just be O-line. It can't just be corner. It can't just be quarterback, whatever you want it to be. It has to be considering, hey, what's your big board say and where do guys line up? I want to talk more about that on the other side of this break here, as well as prioritizing which side of the ball, because both sides of the ball are still important to address right now. That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Wes Uhler, stick with us. We still got a lot to discuss. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as a Q1 2024 validated Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep a Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. There you go, Robinhood. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with Wes Steeler of Steeler Nation Radio. Wes, I want to talk to you about the priorities of this draft a little bit further, and taking a step back from just the positions. I want to look at both sides of the ball here because we're talking about center versus corner there, but there's some people who say, "Man, we've invested enough in the defense. The defense is the highest paid defense in the league, and all this other kind of stuff." And listen, I get it. Why not invest in the offense? And I'd argue, one, they've been investing in the offense. Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, Broderick Jones, all first and second round picks from the last 3 NFL drafts. They've certainly made those moves there. But I'd say, like, again, it goes back to your point. This defense, it can be a great defense if it gives a couple more pieces going the right way. It finished 6th in scoring. It was still the unit that won the Steelers most of their games last season and kept them in plenty of them. I think that that people, if they are stuck to that way of thinking, and if the Steelers are stuck, have that way of thinking, they're going to miss out on great opportunities on either side of the ball. The Steelers need to still be looking at just building with the most talent that they can find in this draft class, regardless of what side of the ball it's on.
Yeah, I agree with you. That gets back to the BPA thing a little bit, certainly. I do think, Chris, part of you wants to, how do I want to say this? You want to give Arthur Smith and I think a couple other people who are still going to be added to that offensive staff, you want to give them an opportunity to hit the ground running. And we all know when you bring in a new coaching staff on either side of the ball, they're going to want some of their guys, right? This might be part of, why we saw the Steelers and Frisman Jackson go in separate directions. Frisman Jackson didn't get fired or anything. His contract just ran out, and the Steelers are going to go in a separate direction because that just probably makes sense as, okay, here's a position coach that we have whose contract is expiring. Arthur Smith is coming in. This opens up an opportunity for him to bring in one of his guys. I think in the draft and in free agency, you want to lean a little towards that direction too. You know what you have in Terrell Austin. You got a lot of veterans on that defense. Keanu Benton and Joey Porter Jr. both seem like home run picks from last year that you're going to build on and hope those guys take a year 2 step. So I'm not saying that all of a sudden you're going 80% offense and 20% defense or anything like that, but I might just, lean a little bit more towards the offensive side and think, okay, I want to help Arthur Smith get some personnel, get some pieces that he thinks he needs to run the offense the way he wants to. So if he's pounding the table and saying, that's Powers Jackson Powers Johnson at center. I need this guy at pick 20. He's going to revolutionize how we can run the ball and play on the O-line. I might be willing to say, okay, you know what? We're going to go offense here instead of defense. If it's something along those lines of, you go pick 20, you go defensive side of the football, you take a defensive back, maybe like we were just discussing. Then I'm really thinking at pick 51, okay, Arthur Smith, who's on the board here that lets you, that you think meshes well with what you want to do with this offense. So that's the one thing I'd say. I'm with you. I don't want to come into this and say, oh, you got to prioritize the offense just because there's more money on the defensive side of the football. And it's, the NFL in 2024, offense rules the roost. There's a balance there, certainly. But I do think I would be leaning a little bit more towards, okay, if it's a 50-50 proposition, if we're in the room on draft day, we're in the room with free agency, and half the room wants this offensive player and the other half wants this defensive player, I might lean towards the offensive side so that you can really give Arthur Smith a full gambit, so that you can fully find out without question, no more buts, no more excuses, no more what ifs you have in Kenny Pickett in his third season, right? I mean, it's time to either poop or get off that pot, to not use the other four-letter word there. So that would be my only thought process in that. If you're going into it saying we just have to prioritize offense or we just have to prioritize defense, I think you're missing the plot a little bit, but I might lean a little bit towards the offensive side just because big year for Arthur Smith, big year for Kenny Pickett, big year for that unit as a whole.
And here's another thing here. We've been talking about the pieces that they've added on offense. You look at like the times that they've added these guys, Deontay Johnson at the end of this deal that he's on right now. Najee Harris needs to get re-signed soon. Pat Freiermuth needs to get re-signed soon. Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, Broderick Jones, all guys who, Calvin Austin, if he can continue developing, all guys that the Steelers could really use to keep moving in the right direction. If you can solidify really the core of this offense with this draft, getting a center, a tackle, and or another receiver, you could make it so that this crew is set moving forward if you have the right guys, and then you can focus on getting younger on defense and making so you don't have to keep paying all the money to the veterans on that side of the ball. That, I think, is a very good strategical front office point by you that the Steelers, probably are looking at right now. Because again, if you look at the offensive linemen are expensive in the NFL. You good to great ones, you got to pay big money for them. And if you can have, I'd even say 3 guys on rookie deals who are kicking butt at the same time, and that means Broderick Jones, a center like Jackson Powers Johnson, or Zach Frazier of West Virginia, and get a guy like Patrick Paul out of Houston, at tackle. If you have those 3 guys and then just 2 vets, that gives you a really good opportunity that if that line develops into one of the better units in the NFL and you're not paying a boatload to keep it together, then you have something to build. You can be aggressive in paying for other positions, including at some point, maybe even quarterback. So, that's where I think that the Steelers, I'm right with you. Offense needs to be just as important as defense in setting their big board, but maybe even more so in saying, if you get the right guys that and they fall to you, do everything you can to make sure that those are the guys on your roster for 2024, and make it so that you can finally figure out the future nucleus of the Steelers offense.
Absolutely. And Chris, just one more thing to piggyback on that too is if you hit on, Broderick feels like a hit, right? If you hit on another guy, and obviously Keanu Benton, Joey Porter Jr., other side of the football though, but if you do that again in this draft, if you find 3 guys again in this draft that can have an impact, maybe not necessarily from day one, but early on in the season, and then see it out through the rest of the way, if you can hit on another 3 guys like that, let's say in this draft, and 2 of them are on the offensive side of the football, then when you have, you've got these guys on rookie contracts for the next 4 or 5 years, that makes it easier to, okay, if we want to pay a Najee Harris, we're going to be able to do that because we got guys on rookie contracts that are punching above their weight class in terms of their production. If we got to pay a George Pickens, we're able to do that because we have these quality. You're 100% right. I mean, that is one of the cheat codes of roster building in the NFL. It's 2 things. It's one, having the cheap quarterback, the rookie quarterback, right, that you can load up around. That's one of the roster building cheat codes that we've seen teams take advantage of. Another one, man, is just having rookies across your roster who are, again, I like that example of punching above their weight class. You're paying them lightweight money, but they're giving you heavyweight production. They found 3 of those guys last year. Big bonus, great year, great job by Omar Khan and company. If they can do that again this year, you're right. I think you'd feel really good about that nucleus on offense, growing together and having the money to keep those guys together as well, too.
Absolutely. We'll get you out of here, Wes, because we all got busy things to do. Wes, thanks so much for joining us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. So Arthur Moats and I, we do the Steelers Blitz. It's on Fox Sports Pittsburgh, which is 9:70 a.m. And, of course, Steelers Nation Radio as well, too. You can get us wherever you get your podcast. Just search Steelers Blitz. And then, yes, for all my tortured Mountaineer souls, I'm under contract now, baby. All right, I'm just doing one WVU show now.
There we go.
It's called In the Gun, and you can get that YouTube wherever you get your podcasts as well, too, In the Gun for all my tortured Mountaineers that want to lock step with me with the old gold and blue.
Absolutely. He's Wes Uhler. He's the man. Wes, thanks so much for joining us here. We'll have you back on again very soon. A lot sooner than your last appearance.
Yeah, no doubt.
Absolutely. He's Wes Uhler. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe to it to get more. We're back tomorrow with Jenna Harner finishing out the week, getting you ready for the Super Bowl weekend and talking more Pittsburgh Steelers here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.